Okay. All right. And then I'm going to present. Let's see. All right. Can you guys see that on your screen?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So I'll give you a little bit of time there, make sure you guys kind of pull up the guided notes. And so every time when we start kind of a new chapter, I'll basically make sure that you guys know what chapter it is. We usually will have a kind of basically the title for the section that we're covering here. So usually they'll give you a time frame. All right, so the first chapter, First Humans, Prehistory to 3500 BC. Now, with this here, like you guys will see BC here. Let me go back. If you guys were if you guys are seniors and you took U.S. history last year, you probably didn't deal with a lot of this kind of the chronological kind of dating terms. All right, so in world history, what we'll see here is these terms used frequently, BC and AD. All right, and so BC stands for before Christ. So it's a Christian kind of centric model of dating events. So when they say 3500 BC, that is 3,500 years before the birth of Christ. And then AD is a misconception. A lot of people believe it means after death, associated with Jesus, but it's a Latin term, Anno Domini, which means the year of our Lord. So according to the Catholic Church, which they kind of established this in the 16th century, that was the basically AD 1 is the year Jesus was born. It's not totally exact. All right. So in many cases with this here, and we'll have some worksheets where it may get a little confusing. I'll try to explain it to you. But BC essentially counts down. All right, meaning that an event that occurred in, let's say, 3500 BC occurred first, or is older than an event, let's say, that occurred in 600 BC. All right, the higher the number, the older the event took place. AD counts up. All right, so an event that occurred in, let's say, AD 1600 is older than an event that occurred in 2000. All right. So it gets a little confusing. So technically we are in the year AD 2020, which it means basically it's been 2020 years since the birth of Christ. Now, in some worksheets I'm going to give you guys, they will talk about, they'll use different terms interchangeably. They'll use BCE, which means before Common Era instead of BC, and they'll use CE, which means Common Era instead of AD. It's more of a kind of a politically correct way of kind of dating things. So just want to give you guys a little heads up on that. It gets a little confusing in world history. You'll figure it out as time goes on. And also give you a handout for your notes on certain chronological terms. All right. So essentially, when you guys signed up for world history, all right, you basically kind of like, you're kind of dealing with a larger kind of time frame, if you will. All right. Now, chapter 1 is essentially prehistory. Much of this is prehistory. And the difference between prehistory and history, as you see there, is basically writing. All right. So prehistory is essentially the study of the past prior to the development of written records. All right. History, which it deals with the past, right? But it's specific when it talks about kind of written records, the evidence of writing. All right. Now, in many cases, history tends to be a little bit more, kind of tells us a more complete story than prehistory would. We get an insight into what the founding fathers had in mind when they wrote the Declaration of Independence. They wrote it down, or what the Emancipation Proclamation was advocating for. All right. However, that doesn't mean that history can't be manipulated. All right, even depending on writing. A lot of times history is the story written by the victors, if you will, in many cases. And so there can be a bias, there can be some manipulation. In, let's say, 1,000 years, archaeologists uncovered the basically the kind of, they're trying to figure out the story of like the presidency of Barack Obama, and only they got information from, let's say, Fox News, they would think that Obama was Satan. Or if they were kind of reversely dealing with the kind of the presidency of George W. Bush and all they got was the information from MSNBC, they would think that he was Satan. All right, so history can be manipulated, but it does give us a little bit more of a story. Prehistory is a little bit harder, all right, because you're not getting insight, particular kind of the way people were thinking. You have to kind of fill in the blanks, so to speak. All right, and so while you guys had written, basically, I gave you 8 kind of statements on that prehistory activity while it's writing, you weren't given the full story. You kind of had to formulate your story, all right? And so what essentially those who kind of study prehistory are primarily doing to fill in the blanks, if you will, are primarily dealing with fossils and artifacts, I'm sorry. So fossils, and these are things you guys probably had in grade school. Fossils are essentially, anything that had lived, most famously bones, right? Remains. Right, paleo kind of, those who are dealing with kind of dinosaurs and stuff like that, paleoanthropologists and paleoarchaeologists deal with a lot of fossils. All right, but also this includes things like plants. All right, so in the story of Utsi, as we read the story, the thing that an example of a fossil would be Utsi himself, right, which wasn't just bones, but actually had pliable skin there. All right, but also anything that he used to make stuff. All right. Now, those things that were kind of shaped and made by people in the past are referred to as artifacts. All right. And so within that story of the Iceman, of Utsi, if you will, you had things like his robe, right? His rucksack, stuff like that. Those would be artifacts. And so you basically, they can, we know he was kind of living in a kind of cold climate area. He also had a bow with him. Was he a hunter? Was that for protection? All this stuff can be kind of filled in there. All right. So those who are dealing with prehistory have to basically kind of fill in the blanks to a certain extent with fossils and with artifacts. All right. And so, like a prime example, obviously fossils there. All right. This is from a dig in South America where they basically found kind of a remains, almost a full skeletal remain there, kind of embedded into kind of some rocks and dirt and stuff like that. And then some examples of artifacts. These would be from around 1,000 found in North America, in the Ohio Valley, of Native Americans, all right, kind of a Native American site there. Now, from this artifact, we can determine that this was a culture that engaged in agriculture. Obviously, we see even remains of seeds, stuff there, but axes and adazes, essentially for clearing land. There was bows for hunting or for protection, stuff like that. Even something like this, which, we have a major site, prehistory site, just straight up the street there at Cahokia. All right, the Mississippians of Cahokia left behind a lot of artifacts, but they didn't leave behind any written records. So we kind of had to fill in the stories there. But this item is often referred to as a chunky stone, which they believe was kind of like a game. They would play almost like kind of like bowling to a certain extent. So those who deal with kind of prehistory can also kind of come to the conclusion that these are people, if they're engaging in essentially kind of like extracurricular activities, stuff like playing games, that they were probably an advanced culture. Now, roughly around the same time, around 1000, AD 1000, these are some artifacts that were discovered in what is Ireland. All right. By comparing the two, you can tell that probably this is more of a culture that used metals, right? This is probably an Iron Age culture. The use of kind of a primitive form of a sword there. You had kind of a drinking vessel there made of iron. Even this was a kind of probably used in rituals. And this could even kind of create a little bit of misconception because we have the idea of Vikings as kind of wearing these horned helmets into battle and such, which there was no evidence of doing that in battle. They did that in some religious rituals, but it indicates also having religion, that this was a civilization that believed in an afterlife and so on and so forth. So these items, while there's nothing written on them, can tell a story. All right. Now, the people that are kind of essentially dealing with filling in the blanks, if you will, when it comes to prehistory, usually kind of broken into two groups, archaeologists and anthropologists. All right. So Archaeologists are the ones who deal with kind of fossil remains, like the most famous ones with paleoarchaeologists. Those are the guys who kind of discover dinosaur remains. And then anthropologists, they kind of fill in the blanks. They deal with a lot of artifacts, but they're also kind of telling a more complete story. So what you guys were kind of doing with the prehistory activity, you were doing more anthropology. All right, you guys all had the same 8 statements, and you formulated the statements according to how you think the story went. And while we all had the same kind of 8 statements, not everybody had the same story. All right. And some of those stories, come to, like when we talked about 110 pounds, was it Utsi himself? Was it the robe? Was it the rucksack? Those were all legitimate theories and hypotheses. All right. And sometimes things change over time. All right, what anthropologists thought maybe 30, 40 years ago, after some new discoveries, may change in the trajectory of the story there. All right. Am I moving too fast for you guys? Are you guys getting these? Did everybody fall asleep?
Yeah, I'm getting
it. I'm used to seeing people fall asleep on me. I'm just assuming everybody's sleeping on me now. All right. So let me know if I'm moving too fast. All right. So these, like I said, these are generally the 2 groups of people that deal with kind of the concept of prehistory. Now, this is a video I was going to show you on. I'm not going to show it to you here, but the idea when we're talking about a lot of these kind of artifacts and a lot of these fossil remains is how old they are is basically the kind of the origin story, if you will. All right. And there's a couple of ways where science plays a role in that, in determining how old artifacts and fossil remains are. All right. The most famous one is what we call radiocarbon dating, or C14. And so this was developed in the 1940s in the University of Chicago. The guy who's credited with that is a guy by the name of Willard Libby, who also worked on the Manhattan Project that developed the atomic bomb. And so Libby kind of determined that every living thing, when it dies, ceases to exist, loses carbon-14. All right, loses C14. So as it decays, the carbon-14 kind of leaves. All right, and so the less carbon-14 that is in a artifact or a fossil remain, the older it is. All right, and so the video was going to show where they found these mummies in Peru from the Chiribaya culture. And they were able to kind of date this not only from the mummy, but also from the coca leaves, that the mummy, the girl who they found, lived anywhere between 1300 and 1400 AD. All right. Now, the deal with that is, while it's giving us a kind of time frame, it's still 100 years. So it doesn't tell the complete story always. All right. In a sense here, like if somebody found your remains in 1,000 years and they determined that you lived anywhere between 1920 and 2020, while they're kind of close, they're not really telling your story, because there's a lot that's happened in between then, particularly when it comes to technology and that. All right. So it's not always accurate in that sense, but it gives us kind of a time frame. And this is probably the most famous way, particularly when it's kind of like dealing with kind of material that's kind of up to 50,000 years old. Now, if anything's older, and then essentially the video would have showed they had this ability where they would take kind of a part of the kind of artifact or the fossil remain, and they would put it in this kind of this contraption there that would separate the kind of the stable carbon-12 and the unstable carbon-14. All right. And so I'm going to show you guys maps, graphs, and charts all throughout the kind of the course here to kind of because I learned from watching the MTVs that young adults are into trap music, chocolate milk, chewing gum, and maps, graphs, and charts. The first 3 I can't give you guys, but the other ones, the maps, graphs, and charts, I can hook you up with all day, every day. All right. And then for anything older, particularly when it comes to kind of geological material, potassium argon dating is used. Next week, when we talk about the section on kind of human evolution, potassium argon dating was used for a number of discoveries, like, for example, a set of footprints that was made that they determined kind of coincided with a classification of human species known as Homo habilis. All right. Also, they would determine the age of the Grand Canyon using potassium argon dating. So again, the use of kind of chemistry here kind of plays a role in kind of the study of prehistory. All right, now I know this is the last slide. So what I want to do is I want to show you kind of this one video here. We got a little bit of time on the Iceman. All right, and how they kind of determined his story. So if you can stick around for me, all right, real quick here, I'm going to play this video. Oh, it won't play for me, will it? Well, never mind. It won't play. Let's see if it'll play. There it goes. Sorry about that.
Prehistoric people had no cities, central governments, or systems of writing. This makes it especially difficult for us to learn about how they lived. Without written records, scientists must depend on other evidence to learn about the prehistoric past. Usually they work with artifacts like tools and pottery. But in 1991, they got a lucky break. Hikers in the Alps stumbled on the body of a man, mummified and frozen, melting out of the ice. But this wasn't the body of one of the hikers who go missing every year in this alpine region. This was a man who had died more than 5,000 years ago.
He's the oldest human mummy ever found, a man 5,300 years old. Scientists call him Utsi, or the Iceman. An arrowhead lodged in the Iceman's back suggested that he was murdered. Utsi was an immediate archaeological sensation. Research teams eagerly studied both the mummy and his incredibly well-preserved gear. A copper axe, an unstrung bow with a quiver of arrows, a flint knife, leather shoes, a woven grass cloak, and goatskin leggings. Could these remains tell them who he was, how he lived, and why he died up here in the mountains? Many researchers thought that Utsi must have been an alpine shepherd, leading goats and sheep to high-altitude pastures in the summer. Shepherds today still herd livestock along the same path where Utsi was found. If Utsi was a shepherd, perhaps he was murdered for his sheep. Anthropologists Hans Potsgumer and Sylvia Reinhardt and archaeologist Anna Pedrotti decided to test this theory. They started by making an exact duplicate of Utsi's clothes. When they were done, Hans donned the outfit. He would find out firsthand whether it could have held up to the tough life of an alpine shepherd. As Hans set off up the mountain on foot, Sylvia and Anna took an easier route by helicopter. For Hans, it was a grueling 4,000-foot climb to duplicate the Iceman's journey. From the mountaintop, Sylvia and Anna could see that Hans was having trouble. Modern-day shepherds use shovels to help them climb. Hans resorted to using the Iceman's axe. At last, he arrived exhausted. The three researchers examined the gear to see how it withstood the climb. His shoes were a disaster. They had no traction, and they didn't keep out the water at all. But the cloak felt as warm as a winter jacket. The mysterious unstrung bow became the perfect climbing staff, and the copper axe helped Hans anchor himself on steep sections of the climb.
But the poor performance of the shoes is the clincher.
This experiment went very good because it's the first time that we had the idea that we used the bow and also the axe for climbing up. And also we see that the shoes totally broken and it's wet inside. And this is the result of the experiment. That's very good.
The poor performance of the shoes indicated that Ötzi probably wasn't a shepherd. Someone wearing shoes like this couldn't make a 4,000-foot mountain climb regularly. But if Ötzi wasn't a shepherd, why was he up here? One possibility is that Ötzi was involved in a fight in the valley below, was badly wounded, and fled up the mountain where he died. In the years ahead, researchers will continue to study Ötzi. They are confident that in time, the Iceman will reveal the story of his life and death.
All right, so this is what he looked like when they uncovered him in '91 in the Tyrol region. Now there was a dispute between Italy and Austria on actually where he was found. Austria ended up wins the case there, and so he's in the university in a museum there in Austria, and this is what it looks like. So every few years, you'll hear they come to some type of like conclusion, like they actually believe that he had like intestinal parasites and stuff like that. But like the theory was initially that he was a shepherd, all right, and that he was murdered for sheep, and then with the kind of like basically hands-on kind of active research there, they determined that the shoes probably weren't conducive for him to be a shepherd. So the theory that was just recently was that he was probably ostracized from a small group and then probably murdered in that case. However, why he was ostracized, we don't know, because he didn't leave behind written records, right? And so we have a little bit of a story, but there's always going to be a mystery kind of surrounding that because the lack of written records there. Okay, so that was the first thing in notes. How'd you guys do with that? You guys okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So I'm going to post that on Google Classroom. So if you want to go back, if you needed to go back for it or whatever. On Monday, I'm going to send out a worksheet. It's going to introduce what we're going to talk about on Tuesday and eventually Thursday. All right. So look for that. All right. I'm going to stop the recording here. Does anybody have any questions or any concerns? All right. I'm going to stop. So if not, you guys have a good weekend. All right.